The sun was sinking low behind the western horizon, its orange rays stretching long and thin over the dusty plains of Arizona. Jacob Miller leaned against the weathered fence of his small ranch, staring out at the fields that had given him little more than hardtack over the years. The earth was dry, the crops thin, and the cattle fewer than he could bear to count. He was a poor rancher by all measures, clinging to his land more out of stubbornness than prosperity. Yet behind his tired eyes, there burned a quiet strength, the kind only forged in hardship. Jacob's wife had died years earlier, leaving him with nothing but memories and the silence of an empty cabin. He lived alone now, scraping by, often going without supper so his animals could eat. The neighbors pitied him, and some even called him a fool for staying on land that could never repay his labor. But Jacob wasn't one to abandon what he had built with his own hands. His ranch, as meager as it was home. That evening, as he walked the fence line to check for breaks, Jacob heard something unusual, faint, labored breathing carried on the wind. He paused, listening. Then, from beyond the mesquite brush, came a sound like the low moan of someone in pain. His instincts flared. Grabbing the worn rifle from his shoulder, he crept through the brush cautiously. What he found stopped him cold. Two figures lay sprawled on the hard ground, half hidden by the dust and shadows. They were women, but unlike any Jacob had ever seen. They were tall, powerfully built, their skin bronzed by the sun and their long black hair tangled with dirt and blood. Their clothes, though torn, bore patterns of the Apache, a people feared and mistrusted by many settlers in those parts. Jacob's first thought was danger. If these women were Apaches, then others might be near. He could already imagine his neighbors whispering that he should walk away, leave them to fate, and protect his own life. But when he looked closer, his heart wavered. They were gravely wounded, one with a deep gash across her shoulder, the other with bruises and a twisted ankle. Their breaths were shallow, their bodies trembling from exhaustion. He lowered his rifle. "Lord help me," he muttered. "I can't leave you out here." With a strength he didn't know he still had, Jacob lifted the first sister onto his back, staggering under her weight, and carried her to his cabin. He returned for the second, sweat pouring from his brow, his knees nearly giving way beneath her size. By the time he laid them both on his straw mattress, his body ached, but his conscience felt lighter than it had in years. Through the long night, Jacob tended to them. He boiled water, cleaned their wounds, and wrapped them in strips of cloth torn from his own shirts. He spooned broth between their lips, coaxing them to drink, and whispered words of comfort though he doubted they understood. By dawn, the sisters stirred. Their dark eyes fluttered open, filled first with fear, then confusion, as they saw the pale, weary rancher sitting beside them. "You're safe," Jacob said softly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "No one's gonna hurt you here." The sisters exchanged glances. They did not speak, but their eyes, fierce yet vulnerable, told him everything. They understood his kindness, even if they didn't share his tongue. For the next day and night, Jacob cared for them as if they were his own kin. He fed them what little food he had, changed their bandages, and even sang low hymns when they tossed in fever. In their silence, he saw reflections of his own loneliness, two souls cast out by hardship, clinging to survival. But as the second dawn broke, Jacob's quiet ranch would no longer be his alone. He awoke to the thunder of hooves. The ground shook as dozens, no, hundreds, of Apache warriors rode in from the hills, their painted faces stern, their lances glinting in the morning sun. Jacob stepped outside, heart pounding, and saw them encircle his ranch like a living wall of muscle and steel. At their center rode a man taller than the rest, his presence commanding, his eyes sharp as flint. The chief. The sisters, now awake, hobbled from the cabin and cried out in their native tongue. The warriors dismounted at once, rushing to them, but the chief raised his hand. Silence fell. He looked at Jacob. For a long moment, the air was heavy with tension. Jacob knew well the stories. Settlers and Apaches had spilt blood on both sides. A lone white rancher harboring wounded Apache women could easily be seen as an enemy, a thief, or worse. His rifle was inside the cabin, useless now. He stood with nothing but the truth in his eyes. "I found them near death," Jacob said, his voice steady though his knees trembled. "I gave them what help I could. That's all." The chief dismounted slowly, his boots hitting the earth with a thud. He studied Jacob, walking a circle around him as the rancher held his ground. The sisters stepped forward then, speaking rapidly, their hands motioning toward the cabin, the bandages, the fire where Jacob had boiled water. Their voices carried urgency, gratitude. At last, the chief stopped before Jacob. "You saved my daughters," he said in careful English, his voice deep and resonant. Jacob blinked, stunned. "Your daughters?" The chief nodded once. "They are blood of my blood. Strong women of my people. And you, a man with nothing, gave them life again." Jacob swallowed hard. He had expected anger, maybe even death. But not this. The chief raised his hand high, and the circle of warriors lowered their weapons. Then, to Jacob's astonishment, the chief bowed his head. "In our ways," he said, "a life saved is a bond unbroken. You are no longer just a poor rancher to us. You are brother to the Apache." Gasps rippled through the warriors. The sisters stood tall beside their father, their eyes shining with tears. Jacob felt a lump rise in his throat, unsure how to speak. But the chief was not finished. "Tomorrow, you shall not wake to hunger or solitude. My people will see that your land is worked, your herds made strong, your fires never cold. You gave freely without asking. Now we give back." Jacob's knees nearly buckled. All his years of struggle, all his nights alone, and here stood an entire nation ready to lift him up. Not because of wealth or power, but because he had chosen compassion over fear. In the days that followed, the promise was kept. Apache men helped mend his fences and tilled his fields, their knowledge of the land breathing new life into soil Jacob thought barren. Women brought food, blankets, and medicines. Children laughed and played in the yard that once knew only silence. The two sisters often sat by his side, teaching him words of their language, smiling at the clumsy way he tried to speak them. For the first time in years, Jacob's ranch was alive. But more than that, his heart was alive. He realized something he had forgotten long ago, that kindness, even in the face of fear, could bridge worlds thought divided forever. One evening, as the chief prepared to return to his village, he clasped Jacob's hand firmly. "You were poor in coin," he said, "but rich in spirit. That is the only wealth that lasts." Tears burned Jacob's eyes as he nodded, unable to speak. He watched as the chief rode away, his daughters waving goodbye, their shadows long against the sunset. Jacob Miller, once a lonely, poor rancher, now stood at the center of something far greater than himself, a bond between peoples. Born from a single act of selflessness. And from that day on, whenever the wind carried the sound of distant drums across the plains, Jacob no longer felt alone. He felt part of a family. A bridge between two worlds. A reminder that compassion has the power to change destinies.